A homeless Navy SEAL shared his last meal with a starving canine. Then the dog led him to a fortune hidden in the ice. The dog was eating snow, not licking it, eating it. Working at the frozen crust at the base of the dumpster behind the Hartley gas station with the focused desperation of an animal that has moved past hunger into something older and more dangerous. His ribs showed through a coat that had once been thick and amber dark and full. His left ear was torn, not recently, an old wound, healed into a ragged notch that carried the particular permanence of a mark earned rather than given. He did not look up when Cole Reyes stopped walking. Cole had 43 cents, a half-eaten packet of crackers, and a sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees in conditions that were already colder than that. He had been sleeping in the maintenance shed behind the Hartley Fairgrounds for 11 days. He had not eaten since yesterday morning. He looked at the dog for a long moment. Then he sat down on the frozen ground and held out the crackers. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story stays with you, please subscribe and follow it until the very end. What happens next in that Montana winter is something we think about every time the temperature drops. Stay with us. Cole Reyes was 38 years old and looked 45 in the way that men look older when they have spent years in conditions that make age irrelevant and come home to conditions where it suddenly matters again. He was 6 feet even, lean now in a way that was not healthy, with forearms that still carried the corded muscle of a man who had trained his body for a decade and a half, like it was the only equipment he could fully trust. His hair was dark, cut short by habit, and his jaw carried a week's worth of growth that was past intention and approaching defeat. His eyes were gray-green, the color of winter water, and they moved through every space he entered with the quiet, systematic attention of someone who had learned to read rooms before they were dangerous and had never been able to stop. He had been a chief petty officer in the United States Navy, SEAL Team 3, 4 combat deployments across Afghanistan, Iraq, and 2 places that required different paperwork than the ones with names he could say out loud. He had come home from the last deployment 14 months ago to find that the T-buy from the Ide in Helmand Province had changed the shape of how his brain worked in ways that did not show on an X-ray and did not qualify him for the tier of disability support he needed and did not stop him from waking at 3 in the morning unable to remember which country he was in. He had lost the apartment in February. He had lost the truck in April. He had been moving west since May, following no logic he could have named. And he had stopped in Hartley, Montana, because the maintenance shed had an unlocked door, and the November wind in that part of the state had a quality to it that he recognized. Cold that meant business. Cold that was not going to negotiate. He was not a man who asked for help. He had been trained in 11 different ways to extract himself from impossible situations, and he had applied all 11 of them to his current situation, and the current situation was still the current situation. He held out the crackers. The dog looked at his hand. Then at his face. Then at his hand again. The amber eyes were clear despite everything, unclouded. Present, doing the specific reading that trained dogs do when they are deciding whether a human being is telling the truth with their body. He apparently decided yes. He stepped forward and took the crackers from Cole's palm with a gentleness that was not weakness, but precision. The gentleness of an animal trained to receive things carefully from human hands. He ate without rushing. Then he sat down, 1 foot from Cole's knee, and looked at him. Cole looked back. The notch in the left ear. The particular way the dog held his body. Not loose, not fully at ease, but the controlled readiness of an animal that had once known exactly what its purpose was and had been separated from that purpose and was carrying the separation with dignity. Cole had seen that posture in men, He had worn it himself. "You a vet?" he said. The dog did not answer, obviously. But he held Cole's gaze with the specific patience of an animal that had been asked to wait before and knew how to do it. Cole reached out slowly and turned the dog's ear, the good one, until he could see the inside. Faint, almost gone. But there, the ghost of a tattoo, the specific alphanumeric sequence used to register military working dogs. He sat back on the frozen ground. "Yeah," he said, "me too." He found an open animal shelter 2 miles outside town and negotiated a 3-day boarding arrangement by offering to repair the broken fence along the South Run, which he did that afternoon with borrowed tools and numb hands and the focused competence of a man who has always been better at problems with physical solutions. He told the shelter volunteer the dog's ear number. She made a call. The dog had been a military working dog, explosive detection, deployed twice to Kandahar, separated from his handler when the handler was medically discharged, entered the adoption program, adopted by a civilian who had surrendered him to a Montana County shelter 8 months ago, transferred twice since, escaped from the second transfer. His name, in the system, was Ghost. Cole stood in the shelter doorway and looked at the dog in the clean kennel with the clean water bowl. "Ghost," he said. The dog's ears came forward. Not the aggressive alertness of an animal tracking a threat. Something quieter. The particular attention of an animal hearing something it had been listening for. Cole slept in the maintenance shed that night with the reasonable certainty that he had found something he had not been looking for, which was the only way he had ever found anything that mattered. He arranged to foster Ghost the following morning, signing the paperwork with the careful signature of a man who understood that his current address was technically a maintenance shed and had written the fairgrounds address in the space provided with the confidence of someone who intended to resolve that discrepancy. The shelter volunteer, a woman named June, who had the silver hair and particular patience of someone who had been doing this work longer than the building had been standing, looked at him for a moment after he signed. "You have somewhere warm?" she said. "Working on it," he said. She handed him a list of names on a printed sheet of paper. "People who sometimes need work done," she said, "if you're handy." He was handy. He had been handy since he was 12 years old in Bakersfield, and the teams had made him handier, and the last 14 months had given him extensive practice at doing what needed doing with whatever was available. Ghost walked out of the shelter beside him and fell into the precise heel position of an animal that has been trained to be an extension of a person's left side, and he held it without being asked, without a command, simply because it was where he belonged, and they both understood that now. The sky was the particular pale gray of a Montana November sky that has decided it's going to snow and is consulting the schedule. The wind came in off the Rockies with a thin, biting cold that makes the world smaller. Cole pulled his jacket tighter. Ghost's thick coat moved in the wind. They walked. The third name on June's list was a property outside Hartley, Margaret Olson, 81, Olson Road, 4 miles north. Needs winter weatherproofing and general maintenance. Difficult to reach. Please knock loudly. He drove out there, borrowed the shelter's pickup with June's permission, on a Thursday afternoon, with Ghost riding in the passenger seat the way Atlas had ridden in the worked example, ears forward, body still, watching the road like it had information to offer. The property was a farmstead, the kind that had been built to last in a century when things were built to last, and had lasted, though the years were showing in the way honest years show. A barn with a new patch on the old roof. A porch that needed 2 boards replaced. Windows that had been recaulked more than once by careful hands. The land around it was flat and white and enormous in the way of Montana land, running out to the mountain wall in the west without any human interruption. A fence line ran north toward a stand of cottonwood trees along a frozen creek. Beyond the trees, a ridge of granite pushed up through the snow like the spine of something buried. Cole knocked loudly. Margaret Olson was 4'11" and wore the particular authority of a woman who had survived 8 decades of Montana winters, and the death of a husband, and the slow, complicated grief of watching everything they had built together become something she managed alone. Her eyes were blue and sharp, and she looked at Cole the way she had probably looked at everything that appeared at her door unannounced, with complete assessment and limited patience. She looked at Ghost. Something shifted in her face. Not the cooing softness that some people produce around dogs, but a recognition. Quiet and immediate. The look of someone seeing something they already knew existed but had not expected to see today. "He's military," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Cole said. "So am I." She stepped back and opened the door wider. Her husband's name had been Roy Olson. He had died 14 months ago, the same month Cole had come home from Helmand Province, though neither of them knew that yet. Roy had spent 40 years building the farm, and 41 years loving Margaret, and the last 4 years losing himself to Alzheimer's in the slow, cruel way of that disease, which takes the person before it takes the body, and makes grief a thing you begin before the ending. She fed Cole soup and told him about Roy, the way widows talk about the men they have loved for long enough that the love and the man and the life are no longer separable things. Ghost lay on the kitchen floor beside her chair and pressed his head against her knee for a long moment, in the specific way the framework described, not soliciting affection, offering something. Margaret put her hand in the fur along his neck without quite looking down, the way people accept comfort when they are not sure they deserve it. Cole fixed the porch boards that afternoon and caulked 2 windows and replaced a hinge on the barn door that had been wrong for long enough that the door had learned to compensate. He did not talk much while he worked. He did not need to. There is a language in useful work that says most of what needs to be said. Margaret paid him in cash from an envelope in the kitchen drawer, more than he had quoted, less than she should have been able to afford, and asked if he could come back the following week for the roof line on the north side of the barn. He said he could. He had not eaten this well in 11 months. He did not know, yet, about Wade Pruitt. Wade Pruitt was 47 years old and owned Pruitt Land Holdings, which was the company name for the operation by which Wade Pruitt had purchased 11 properties in Hartley County in the preceding 4 years at prices that had more to do with the financial pressure he had applied than the actual value of what he was buying. He had a lawyer named Dennis in Billings, and a relationship with the county assessor's office that several people had noticed and no one had formally documented. And he had been trying to acquire the Olson property for 2 of those 4 years. Roy Olson had refused him twice. Margaret Olson had refused him 3 times since Roy's death, most recently in September, when Pruitt had sent Dennis to the farmstead with a folder of paperwork and the particular language of a legal document designed to appear inevitable. Margaret had told Dennis to get off her porch. Dennis had told her that a woman her age, alone, with property taxes that were 3 months in arrears, might want to think carefully about her options. The taxes were 3 months in arrears because Roy had managed the accounts, and Roy's mind had been going for 4 years before his body followed, and the specific organizational infrastructure of a working farm, the accounts, the filings, the deadlines, had quietly collapsed in the space that grief and Alzheimer's had created. Margaret knew the taxes were overdue. She did not know exactly how overdue, because looking at the papers Roy used to manage was a kind of looking she had been unable to fully do. She had not told Cole any of this. She had no particular reason to tell a man she had known for 1 afternoon. Ghost knew something was wrong with the property. Cole could not have explained how he knew that the dog knew. He knew the way handlers know, through the specific quality of attention the animal brings to certain things. The reading of meaning rather than noise. Each time they drove out to the Olson farm, Ghost oriented differently as they turned onto Olson Road. His ears came forward. His posture changed, and he watched the landscape with the systematic sweep of an animal running a pattern search. Cole told himself it was new territory. Dogs read new territory. That was what Ghost was doing. He told himself that for 2 weeks. It was the frozen creek that changed everything. They had finished the barn roof line. 4 days of work spread across a week and a half. Cole on the barn and Ghost doing his systematic reading of the property's perimeter when Ghost stopped at the fence line near the cottonwood trees. He did not bark. He did not whine. He sat and did not move. Cole knew that sit. He had seen it in Kandahar in photographs and in briefings, and he had felt the version of it in his own body. The specific, trained stillness that means, here, this is it. I have found what we were looking for. He looked at Ghost. He looked at the frozen creek beyond the fence. He looked at the ridge of granite beyond the creek, gray-white under the snow, running north to a point where 2 outcroppings formed what looked, from this angle, like a natural shelf. "Show me," he said. Ghost went under the fence with the precise confidence of an animal that had been waiting to be asked. The shelf was 4 feet deep into the granite face, protected from direct snowfall by the overhang above it. And what was on the shelf was a metal strongbox of the kind sold at hardware stores for exactly the purpose of keeping valuables safe from fire and flood and the general fragility of ordinary containers. It was padlocked. It had been there long enough that the frost had worked into the seam, and Cole needed 10 minutes with a flat bar from his tool bag to persuade the padlock loose. Inside, $64,000 in cash, bound in rubber bands, in the specific careful way of a man who has worked his whole life and trusts what he can hold in his hands. A handwritten note on ruled paper in the clear, deliberate script of a man who had been writing carefully because he knew his careful days were numbered. Margaret, this is ours. 40 years of what we built together. I am putting it here because I don't trust myself with accounts anymore, and I don't want our children to find it before you do. The rocks north of the creek. You'll know the spot. I love you. Roy Cole sat on the frozen ground beside the shelf and read the note twice. Ghost pressed himself against Cole's side, not the trained contact of a working dog maintaining position, but the specific warmth of an animal that understands that the human beside him is in the middle of something large. Cole folded the note carefully. He put it in his chest pocket. He closed the strongbox. He sat with his back against the granite face and the Montana sky above him, and $64,000 in his hands, and the particular feeling of a man who has been positioned by something larger than himself in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, and who is not sure he deserves it, but is absolutely sure what he is going to do with it. He did not tell Margaret about the money immediately. He told her about Ghost's behavior at the fence line. He described the shelf, the strongbox, and the padlock. He did not describe the contents. He said, "Mrs. Olson, I think your husband may have left something for you. I'd like to take you there." She looked at him for a long moment with those blue eyes that missed nothing. "Roy always did like that spot," she said. "He used to fish that creek in the summer." Said the granite held the morning cold. She put on her coat. He helped her over the fence and across the frozen ground, and Ghost walked beside her with the careful attention of an animal, matching his pace to someone who needed that matching. When she saw the shelf, she put both hands over her mouth. When she read the note, she did not make a sound for a long time. Then she said, quietly, to no one and to Roy, and to the granite and the cold sky, "You foolish, wonderful man." Cole drove to Billings the following week and found a veterans legal aid office that had a lawyer named Patricia who had done a year at JAG before going into private practice. and who, when he laid out the situation. The tax arrears, the Pruitt Holdings offer, the Dennis visit in September, the county assessor relationship, looked at him with the specific appreciation of a person encountering a problem they know exactly how to solve. The assessor relationship is documented, she said. I've seen Pruitt's paperwork before. 3 of those 11 properties had similar irregularities in the assessment process. What do we need? Cole said. What we have, she said. And a little time. The taxes were paid from the strongbox within 10 days. Patricia filed a formal complaint with the state regarding the county assessor's conduct in connection with Pruitt Land Holdings' acquisitions. The complaint triggered a state audit. The audit found what Patricia had expected to find, a pattern of undervaluation that had been applied consistently to properties Pruitt subsequently acquired, with no corresponding pattern on properties he did not acquire. Wade Pruitt's attorney Dennis negotiated for 6 months. It did not go well for Wade Pruitt. He was required to divest 4 of the 11 properties at independently assessed value and return the difference between assessed and market price to the original owners. He paid a civil penalty. He lost his relationship with the county assessor's office because the assessor, a man named Gerald, had resigned before the audit was complete. Wade Pruitt did not go to prison, but the name Pruitt Land Holdings no longer appeared on any active filings in Hartley County, and the properties he had not been required to divest he sold quietly over the following year to buyers who were not paying Pruitt prices. By the following April, when the cottonwoods along the creek came back and the frost let go of the Montana ground and the creek ran clear and cold over the granite, Cole Reyes was living in the apartment above Margaret Olson's barn that Roy had built in 1987 for the hired hand he'd never quite been able to keep, which had sat empty for 22 years, and which Margaret had offered at a rent that was the specific rent of a woman who understood that some things are worth more than their market price. He had found work, real work, reliable work, with a construction contractor in Hartley who had been one of June's names on the shelter list, and who had, after 2 weeks of watching Cole work, offered him a foreman's position that Cole had taken with the particular relief of a man returning to something that fits the shape of his hands. Ghost had his own bed in the apartment and his own spot by the window that faced north toward the ridge, where he sat in the mornings in the clean, specific attention of an animal that has completed what he was sent to do and is now simply watching the world with the satisfaction of a job finished right. His ribs did not show anymore. His coat had come back, thick and amber dark and full, the way it had been before. The notch in his left ear was the same. Some marks stay because they are supposed to. On the first Saturday of every month, Cole drove Margaret to Roy's grave in the Hartley Lutheran churchyard, and Ghost rode in the back seat, and Margaret brought a tin of the coffee Roy had always liked and poured some on the ground beside the headstone, which was a thing she had read somewhere that people did for the dead, and which Roy would have found wasteful and touching in equal measure, and which she did anyway. Patricia settled the last of the Pruitt complaint in August. She called Cole with the outcome at 7 in the morning, and he was already outside with coffee, watching Ghost do his morning reading of the fence line and the ridge and the frozen creek that was no longer frozen. And he listened to the news with the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who has learned to trust that things end up where they need to be, even when they take the long way around. "You did good," Patricia said. "Ghost did good," Cole said. Outside, the dog turned from the fence line and looked back at him. Those clear amber eyes across the distance of the yard. The same deliberate attention as the night behind the Hartley gas station, when a man with 43 cents and half a pack of crackers had sat down on the frozen ground and offered what he had to an animal who needed it. Cole raised his coffee cup. Ghost's tail moved once, slow and certain, the way a dog's tail moves when the right answer has been found and peace has arrived, and the story is, at last, fully and completely over. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in the forms we are watching for. Sometimes they don't come as thunder or light or a clear voice from somewhere above. Sometimes they come as a starving dog eating snow behind a gas station. Sometimes they come as a man with almost nothing, sitting down on frozen ground and giving away what little he has left, not because he calculated the return, but because something inside him, built by years of service and loyalty, simply could not do otherwise. God does not always restore what was lost through dramatic intervention. Sometimes he places the right soul in the right empty town in the right November and says, "Here. This is where you're needed." And the miracle is not the fortune in the ice. The miracle is the man who sat down and the dog who stepped forward, and the moment when two lost things found each other in the cold and became, together, something neither could have been alone. Loyalty is not a transaction. It was never meant to be. Roy Olson understood this. He hid 40 years of love in the granite because he trusted that love, properly placed, finds its way home. He was right. It always does. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that what you give away in the cold finds its way back to you. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you have ever shared your last meal with someone who needed it more, we want to hear that story. Your story may be the thing that changes how someone else moves through tomorrow. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the grace that finds people when they stop running, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you, no matter how far from home you feel tonight, that you are never truly lost.